So I'm so excited today to have somebody I'm so inspired by. She is an eternal optimist. She's a STEM advocate, diversity and inclusion person in our community that's really looking to empower the youth, people that are underrepresented. And she also has just a little bit of a career at Microsoft where she is helping the Azure team as a support engineer. We're here today with Grace MacJones. Grace, how are you doing? It's so nice to have you on our podcast.
I'm doing great. So excited to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I think when I reached out to you, there's two reasons. There's many reasons, but there's two reasons that come up. We know when I think about Grace MacJones. And the first one is I think you're one of the brightest minds in the game for all those reasons we'll talk about on the call. But I think, too, I mentioned it to you, it's your energy, so when I say optimist, when you come into the room, it's also because you have that bright smile and that bright energy. So I'm hoping our audience gets to capture some of that today, to get to learn about you. So we'll just start off, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, your background, where you grew up, maybe a little bit about your family and kind of your journey and to kind of get you where you are today.
Sure. And thank you so much for your kind words. I know that during times like this, it's hard to be an optimist. But I'm happy to always bring positive energy wherever I'm at. So from the beginning, right? So I was born in Nigeria. My parents migrated to the US when I was about 10. And for me, there was a lot of culture shock coming. I think the first thing was the educational system. Definitely different from what I grew up knowing. And I never really saw myself in tech because no one in my family was in the tech field, and tech's something that I discovered later on. But yeah, moved to the United States when I was 10, and I lived in Virginia for a while, and then decided to go to college. And the first time I went to college was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I remember just being kind of clueless because I'm like, okay, this is cool, but I didn't know what I wanted to study or what I wanted to do. So I ended up dropping out the first time because school is expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, let me figure out what I want to do so I'm not like wasting money, being undecided. So I took some time off, and I had friends in college who were studying, what I was studying, international relations, and they graduated and didn't have a job waiting for them. And most of them had to go get their master's. And so for me, when I decided to go back to school, I was like, hey, I need to study something that's actually impactful right after graduation. And that's why I kind of like put my focus in, and I knew that tech was something that was kind of like booming in a sense. And the only reason why I got interested in tech was because I worked as a graphic designer at my university, and I would play around with Photoshop, Illustrator, because I'm creative at heart. And I was like, this is really cool. Like, I wouldn't have a job without this software. Like, it kind of blew my mind. And I went down a rabbit hole of just researching and like, what is Photoshop created from? Like, how was it created? And I saw it was a programming language. I'm like, what are programming languages? And so kind of did my own research. And that's what really got me excited about being in tech, about creating things to help other people create, and just even having jobs in a sense. So that's just a little bit about me. And now I'm at Microsoft. And obviously there's a longer story to that journey, but that's kind of a brief summary.
Gets you up to, let's get you caught up right now. Let's get Grace in 20 seconds, recap your whole life story. No, absolutely. We're going to dig into some of that stuff. Part of, I think, the synergy that you and I have is, I was also an immigrant, and I came to the U.S. at 8 and 9 years old. And it's so hard to describe that feeling to people. You mentioned Virginia, I landed luckily as well in Seattle, and to go from the Middle East to Seattle or to Tulsa, Oklahoma, or to Virginia, you have no context. It's wherever you go is amazing, and you're surprised about the tremendous amount of opportunity that's available to you in America. So it's very easy to go to college, and there's just so much, and there's groups, and there's things you can do in your free time, and man, you can go down that rabbit hole that you described, right? So it's just an influx of so much noise, information, opportunity. And, the immigrant story, why I love it so much, it's about landing somewhere and then taking that and just driving it to whatever your goals are. So you described going into graphic design, and that curiosity of how am I creating this art in this system and what's behind it? And then thinking another layer and saying, somebody engineered this. Oh, there's a code, there's a language, and it's really kind of something people don't see, right? It's an elegant solution. Right. You see the user interface. You don't see everything in the background. So I'd love to maybe just quickly talk about people that are creative, right? And then having the opportunity to end up in a tech career. I listened to one of your podcasts. That's something I didn't mention in the intro, is your Tech Unlocked podcast, and how you're looking to kind of demystify all these myths around technology. You know, it seems like something people can't break into, but you're a graphic designer, in the beginning, right? And now you're an engineer at Microsoft. And then you had a guest. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the guests that you had and how they went from being an artist to now being a coder and why they did it as well.
Yeah, so on one of the episodes of the Tech Unlocked podcast, I had the pleasure of interviewing Demarius Edwards. And I was very fascinated with his story because I hear a lot of times people, tell me they want to transition into tech, or they have different passions and they don't want to join tech because it seems nerdy or uncool. And for, the guest that I had, he kind of shared how he was, a touring artist, putting out music, and it would look good on the front end, right? Like, yep. You have all this attention, but on the back end, he was a broke, struggling artist. And for him, he was just like, how can I make my life better? Like, what can I do? And then he found, a boot camp and decided to kind of start that journey of coding. And now he's a coding instructor at another boot camp teaching Black and underrepresented folks how to code. And I really love this story because it shows that literally anyone can join the tech industry, and you don't have to sacrifice your passion doing so. And another thing is that he's able to empathize and sympathize with other folks that he teaches now. They can look up to him and see how inspiring that is. And I just love that he brings his energy. I remember one of the questions I had asked on the show is like, what did you bring from being an artist into the tech world? And he said storytelling. My music's about storytelling. And so
cool.
When I code, or even when he was looking for a job, he already knew how to kind of like market himself, right? And I'm like, that's brilliant, because a lot of times people always look at what they don't have when coming into tech and not look at what they do have.
The strengths.
So I tell people, like, focus on the skills that are transferable, right? Like, let's say you worked as a pilot or as a teacher, and you want to join, the tech industry. Like, look at the skills you already possess and see what you can bring into this new world. So it is possible.
And actually, one of my biggest breaks, I'm a comparative literature major. I studied cinema studies in college at UW. And I got an opportunity at Microsoft, right? Really early on, it was, I think a coordinator, administrator kind of position. I'm like, I just need a job. You explain sometimes when you get out of college, you're like, why did I choose that degree again? You're not really, you're chasing a passion or a meaning, and which is what I recommend everybody does, right? It worked out just fine for me, and I was really lucky. But when I went into Microsoft, I was shocked at the amount of roles that are not technical. The amount of value I was bringing as a writer, because a lot of the people around me were highly intelligent business people, technical minds, salespeople, but there was a need for a storyteller. There was a need for a communicator. So I think that's one of the reasons that resonated with me personally is, these companies have so many opportunities. And especially if you're looking to, let's say, pandemic proof your career, right? I mean, I'm in the creative field now where we're telling stories, and I'm also a technology executive, and the people that are coming to me looking for advice, jobs, opportunities, all I tell them is think about your strengths. So you nailed that. So let's talk a little bit about, a career in tech, having that mindset, like you said, anything is possible. And maybe in the mind of, I'm someone right now that's looking, how do I break in? Get maybe a little bit of your story. How did you get the Microsoft opportunity? And then maybe a couple of steps you can give that people, tangible things they can do to demystify it and go after a tech career.
Yeah, so I'll say, I didn't like I said, grew up thinking I wanted to be in tech, or, tech was a path for me. After deciding to go back to school, I came to Texas and I went to Sam Houston State University and decided to study computer science. Now, not everyone needs to study computer science. You can go to a boot camp or self-teach yourself. But for me, I'm like, I really want to understand, and I need teachers or people to help me when I don't get certain things. And it was senior year, about to graduate, and I was just like, I actually know, like, I don't know anyone in my industry right now. So, like, what am I going to do after I graduate, right? Kind of the same scenario I faced the first time in college. And so basically, I had no network. I had no kind of community to show me what's next. And I feel like that's something that a lot of college students go through. It's like you're told to go to college, graduate, and then you're like, then what? Especially if you're an immigrant or someone from an underrepresented group where, your family or community isn't in that industry. It's hard to figure out what to do next. So I kind of committed to, for me, I'm a self learner in a sense. So I was like, okay, I don't really know much, but I'm going to do my best to figure out more about this industry. And so the first thing that came into my mind was like, hey, I can attend like tech events, right? I don't know why I didn't think about this earlier, but I was like, when the pressure is on, some creative thoughts comes in. And so I decided to apply to attend the Grace Hopper Conference, which is the biggest conference for women in computing. And I got a scholarship because most of those tech conferences can be expensive. And I remember attending, and that was kind of the first time I saw like a lot of women in the, STEM field or the computer science field. And, the school that I went to, there wasn't that many women in my class or even Black women, even my professors. I remember not having a single Black professor in my computer science class. So I didn't really think it was possible for me to be in that field because I didn't see representation earlier on. But going to this conference, I saw women speaking, showing the technology they're working on. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, there's hope for me in a sense. And it got me really excited and it really pushed me to aim for more, because big tech companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, they didn't come to recruit at my school. But being in the place where kind of the action was happening and I could see people who looked like me, presenting and talking, that really inspired me. So I, try to do as much networking as possible. I remember going to a Women of Color event, like Mixer that Google had. And I went there early because usually those lines are long to get in. And I remember talking to the lady, besides me. And she was like, hey, like, who are you? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm a student, but I don't know what I'm going to do after I graduate. And usually I'm not that honest up front, but I was like, hey, casual conversation.
Roll with it, yeah.
Exactly. And then she, she was like, hey, have you heard about apprenticeships? Because I didn't have an internship, while I was in college because I had to work and pay for school. And I was like, no, I've never heard about apprenticeships. Like, what are those? And she's like, well, Microsoft has an apprenticeship program. Basically, it's kind of like either a few weeks or to a month where you're given kind of like a project, placed on a team, and then you're invited to, interview for a full-time position. She's like, hey, look into it. Just a casual conversation. I was like, okay, sure. I didn't really think anything of it. And it's funny that, sometimes someone can tell you something, but if you don't follow up and actually invest in that information, it never leads anywhere. So I was like, you know what, let me just figure this out. And so I looked up the program, I applied, got into the program, moved to Seattle without like any guarantee of having a full-time job, and finished the whole program, and I was able to get a full-time offer after that. And so it's interesting just to see how, sometimes just sharing a piece of information can really go a long way for someone. And that's why I'm so passionate about telling everyone everything that I learn, because I'm not sure if it's the podcast or the LinkedIn post. I don't know what's going to inspire someone. So I try to do the best as I can to share whatever I know with everyone.
You're amazing. Wow. I didn't know that was kind of the way that you took that opportunity. And there's a couple of things there. I think the networking piece is so key. And
yes.
You mentioned you didn't find when you were in school, there wasn't that role model. There wasn't that person like you, right? And then those big schools or those big companies weren't coming to your school, right? So instead of waiting for either the world to change or for the companies to say, I'm going to go to that school and then come to you and hand deliver you an opportunity of a lifetime, you took a different approach. You went to where your audience was, where the tribe was, where the network is, and you went there. And the thing that I think people are so stressed out about is networking is scary at first, right? And when we go talk to people, my first 2 years of even attempting to say I'm networking with people, I would just talk about the weather or the Seahawks. And I would walk away and I'm like, am I this lame? Am I like really this lame that all I could talk about is the weather and a sports team? But I knew I wasn't comfortable yet. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, in my own story. But the more you get comfortable to where you're just having a Grace Ahmad conversation, and it's not my title having a conversation with another title, it's amazing because the other person's always a human being. And so if you don't kind of just let loose and just say, I'm just having a tough time breaking in, they look and say, you know what, there's a program for you. It's underutilized. The people applying to it, you know, they might already have an in, right? So that person says, you know what, let me give you an opportunity, but it's your job as a person looking to take it to the next step to really capitalize.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the part that, you know, when I think about the moment I met you, right? So this was, I think, 3 years ago. It was a small little place in Capitol Hill. It was a theater company. It was like a beautiful kind of brick wall. It was like seating for like 15 people. I met you, Noelle LaCharity, a few awesome other people. But there was like 6 of us in the audience. And the whole time you were talking, I just kept seeing blogs, videos, podcasts, right? I'm like, I'm so inspired by this person, and she's way younger than me and just kind of starting to rise. And so you took that, and because there wasn't a network for you, because there wasn't a tribe, you're now creating your own mediums like you talked about. So let's talk about your podcast and how you're using that podcast to kind of speak to the younger you, or maybe somebody that doesn't see themselves in tech for all those barriers. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast, why specifically you're using that medium, and then also maybe some of the cool things that have come, some of the stories, some of the people telling you, hey, great job. I noticed it's a 5-star rated podcast. It's you know, you're in season 2. So I'd love for people to hear more about your podcast.
Yeah. You know, something I tell people often is that, you know, if you don't find a community, build it, right? If you don't find what you're looking for, create it. So in a sense, I'm creating something that I wish existed when I was in college, right? Now there's a lot of, you know, YouTube videos or podcasts about, you know, the technology itself. Like there's a bunch of videos about how to learn how to code or be a developer, which is great. We need more of that. But the realities of actual working in this industry, or even the other opportunities, like you mentioned earlier, like there are non-technical positions in tech, but people don't know about them. They see the stereotypes in the movies where, okay, I just have to be hacking away or coding away.
With the hoodie on and like a dark room. With the hoodie
on in the dark. And it's like, for some people, you're like, that's not attractive to me. I don't want to do that. And they miss an opportunity to have a huge impact. And so for me, it took me a while. You know, the podcast launched in 2019, and I remember just having a lot of imposter syndrome because I'm like, I'm kind of like new in my career. Like, what do I have to say? Why should people care? Why should people listen? But then again, I was like, okay, stop thinking about yourself, right? Like, I think that's another thing with imposter syndrome that I've noticed about me, and it's different for everyone, is that you focus on yourself and it paralyzes you from helping other people. So I told myself, okay, who are you trying to help and why? You know, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it's not about me anymore. You know, it's about other people who are struggling. And, you know, the audience is for early career folks, you know, Black and brown folks who want to be in this industry, but don't really know the other opportunities, the other opportunities that are available to them. And so when I launched the podcast, the goal was to, you know, interview a lot of diverse voices doing great work from different companies. So I've interviewed people from Netflix, Amazon. And at the same time, it also helps me build my network because now I have a diverse group of people that I can talk to regularly if I need career advice or if I'm looking to switch, you know, roles or things like that. And so my goal was to really demystify the world of tech. And obviously it sounds really big and ambiguous. But, you know, I feel like if I'm focused on helping one person, you know, that can go a long way. And so with the interviews that I have, the conversation that I have, it's been really rewarding to see people say, hey, thank you so much for highlighting, you know, how to be, you know, a program manager or how to take, you know, ownership of my career. And it's just having these conversations that are usually not amplified. And so I'm glad that I have this medium. And for me, I consume a lot of podcasts. You know, that's the medium that I love receiving information, and it's easy for me to receive. And that's why I chose podcasting, because it doesn't feel like a job, or it doesn't feel like, oh, this is a lot of work, because I already enjoy learning from this medium.
Absolutely, yeah. We're enjoying that too with the brand transformers for the same reasons. I've always been somebody that's hypercritical of myself and in my career, and it's helped me get to where I am. Right. So, in many ways, sometimes you gotta silence that inner voice and just get it out
Yeah.
there. We call it. Actually, Tim Salau, who I know he's like, just ship it. And then I'm like, hey, I can't just ship the content. I gotta kind of curate it, make it good. But you see the people that are prolific at it, that are some of the best in the world, they're just putting content out there. And I think
Yeah.
part of your progression in your career that I noticed, from that room when I saw you in person to seeing you transfer that online, and then seeing some speaking opportunities that you started to get, at Microsoft. And I think, was it either Inspire or Ignite, one of those events? I think you had
Ignite.
was it
Yeah.
Ignite? Can you talk a little bit about Ignite and just that feeling of, you're now on a stage with this huge global audience. What does that feel like, for that kid that didn't know what they wanted to do? Now you're speaking to one of the most incredible, impacting companies in the world that also transformed its brand in the last few years. So what did that feel like?
Yeah, it's definitely surreal. I think sometimes I forget to like pause and kind of like take it all in and reflect. But during the season, I've had a lot of time to reflect. I spoke for the first time at I think Microsoft Build in 2018, just sharing my experience of what it is to be a Black woman in tech and how I got into the industry. And then last year at Microsoft Ignite, I had opportunity also to host one of the key segments, and a lot of it has just been me, saying yes to opportunity, because when I think about it, it's nerve wracking because I'm not like a speaker. I never set out to be like, oh, I'm going to be a public speaker, or, I want to host events. But for me, and especially to be honest, as an immigrant, you know what you came from. And so when you see opportunities that you've worked hard for, it's hard to say no, and I think for me, as someone who prioritize personal growth and career growth, I'm always on the lookout to say, hey, is what I'm doing, helping other people, and I mentioned how I didn't see people like me growing up in tech. And so I'm like, okay, it's not just for me. I know if other people of color or other Black women able to see me on this stages, then they know, hey, I think it's possible to be a woman in tech and to be at this level of sharing, my experiences to a global audience. And so whatever I do, it's not only just, oh, look at me, pay attention to me. It's not about that. It's more about knowing that there is someone like watching and saying like, hey, like if she can do it, why can't I? And it's been amazing going through that process and building that part of my personal brand.
That's so cool. Yeah, I think if you stop and think about it too much, you'll let the nerves take over. And so one of the things that I tell people is always try to get to yes. All right. If it's when the opportunity presents itself, it's a very famous quote, Richard Branson's like, say yes and figure it out. And, I have people reaching out and saying, oh, I'm a public speaking coach and I do all this stuff. I'm like, hey, just because I do that doesn't mean that's my profession or what I want to do. Mm-hmm. I just enjoy to do it. And I think part of your success is you're not a professional public speaker. You're relatable.
Yeah.
You said something on one of your podcasts, if you can repeat it, it was kind of like these 3 steps. You said relatable, marketable, memorable. Is that it? Or is that the right order?
Something like that. I think, a lot of times, people focus on perfection, and I think that if you're able to use what you have where you're at, then you're able to be relatable because you're not trying to act like something that you're not. Even if you're an expert, I think that no one wants people to say, hey, do this, if become like me and all that stuff. It's like, okay, great. You're successful. I'm not. You have nothing to offer. But I think when we're real with people and authentic, that's when people can really buy into our story or even to the content that we're sharing. So from a perspective of building personal brand, people say, bring your real self to work or be yourself. And sometimes it may sound cliche because it's like, okay, cool, whatever. But I think that's really key because I feel like we're in a space where, everyone's putting content out there, but not a lot of people are being real, right? Or even passionate about what they are putting out. And so you're able to distinguish yourself when you are yourself and people can tell, oh, this is who this person is on and off camera, right? Yep. Online and offline. And that is something that, can go a long way.
Yeah, I think the personal brand journey is important because it's not a one size fits all. People, somebody said something to me like, you never know kind of the inner turmoil going on in somebody's life or in their head. And, a lot of the times when I've managed teams or somebody where I thought, they're like me at that time in my career. And I say, why are they not grabbing that opportunity? Why are they not doing it? And I get kind of frustrated. And then I think about it, and it's a different journey. It's a different, they're chasing a different meaning. They're chasing a different value. So you can't tell somebody what to do. You can just share what you've done. And then hopefully people that are like you, that are looking for somebody like you to help them, guide them, it resonates with them. So I think if we touch 4 or 5 people's careers and help shape them, and that's what I love most is when people come back and it's those ones and twos, and they say, this was the moment. And that's something I spent this entire year doing throughout this pandemic, is sending personalized notes, calling my mentors, and just making sure to thank them, because I was like you, just so busy kind of trying to achieve. I didn't ever pause to say, who helped me get here? Am I even enjoying this moment? Or am I in the moment? Or am I a year ahead, upset that I haven't accomplished more? So that's really cool. I think the imposter syndrome always keeps popping up, and it's, and many people know what it is. Many people don't. People probably feel it, but don't know what it is. Can you describe imposter syndrome, and especially in the tech world, and how it's not just in the tech world, but maybe specifically how that kind of feels and maybe weighs on your anxieties or other people's anxieties, and it stops them from really capturing that moment and seizing opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome is different for a lot of people, but at its core, it's feeling like you don't belong, and people are going to find out, like, hey, how did you get in here, and kind of like point you out. And in tech, it's a real thing because there's so much to learn at any given moment, right? It's like technology is always booming and always growing, and just like, okay, whenever you find yourself, especially in big companies, people are just like, okay, do I deserve to be here? Like, what if they find out that I don't know this one programming language or this one thing? And it's like, honestly, everyone is so concerned about themselves that they don't really care about you, to be honest. And that's something I've discovered, where no matter what level, I've talked to a lot of people who are, seniors, who've been even in my company for like a long time. And it's like, yeah, that's still a concern for them, where it's just like, okay, do I know enough for this new level that I'm at? And so I think that a lot of people can relate to being like, okay, like, I don't have to have it all figured out. As long as I have that growth mindset to continue growing and learning, I should be okay. And, one of, the people that I really look up to, and someone I interviewed on my podcast, MacJones, gave a practical tip of how to like kind of battle imposter syndrome. She's like, take a timer, put it for like, I think, was it 2 minutes, right? And then in those 2 minutes, write down everything you've ever accomplished, even if it's graduating from college or you learn how to cook, like just write it down, because sometimes, like I said, we don't pause and reflect about how far we've come as an individual, always focusing on what we don't have or what we don't know. And so I think a good way to combat imposter syndrome is really pausing and saying, okay, how did I get to where I'm at, right? And really, believe that you deserve to be where you're at. I know for a lot of Black people, it's hard, in tech, because you're like, okay, am I here because I'm a diverse hire, or am I here because of my skill?
Yep.
And it's hard, but I tell people, it's like, hey, like for Black people, the bar sometimes is raised higher because you have to prove yourself that, oh, I do deserve to be here. And sometimes work twice as hard. But I tell people, believe that you're worthy of the space that you're in, and own that space. And so it's a constant battle. I don't think you're ever going to be like, oh yeah, I beat imposter syndrome. It's more about just learning how to manage it and moving forward.
That's such great advice. I think even when you think you figured out, something like a pandemic happens, and even if you're in your 40s and 50s and you're a top level executive, but you don't know how to do virtual meetings, you cannot communicate clearly when you're not in person, those people are feeling like imposters right now, right? And they're thinking, wait a second, this new upstart might take my job because they know how to lead teams virtually, but I think they're smart enough to know this is a moment in time. This is how we respond to it. It would be a wasted opportunity if I didn't talk to you about diversity and inclusion, and especially when you talked about Black people in technology, and especially with everything going on, with social injustice in the world. It's just so much is up in the air for the average day American. And it's hard for people to put themselves in the shoes of somebody who's black, who's trying to be in a tech world or trying to do something with their lives, but they're facing these barriers. I just love to you. There's no real question here. I think you're somebody that understands diversity and inclusion, but what would you say to our audience in terms of ways they can empathize in the moment and things that they can do, not just, post a black square on Instagram, right? I mean, I think people, even that there was a lot of backlash to that, but I knew why people did it. Because people say, I don't know what to say, right? And they say, if I say something and then somebody else says, what are you saying? There's this fear that I'm going to be erased as well, right? Which I think people that are racist deserve to be erased, right? Like, we don't even need to go down that route. But I think I kind of understand why people did the black tile. They went, okay, I'm supporting this. I just don't know what to say. But then people said, wow, that's all you're going to do. So can you give us some tangible things people can do? And I know that we talked about, you don't have to be the expert, Grace, but I think you're a voice of reason here, and you are an expert in diversity and inclusion. So just give us some tips here. How can we be more empathetic as a society?
So, everyone responds to this differently, and it's been a very traumatizing year for a lot of Black people, especially when it comes to still showing up at work, putting a smile on your face and acting like nothing has happened. Wow. And, in terms of people who want to be allies or people who want to be active in fighting against racism and being anti-racist, I think recognize that we're going through a lot of pain, right? And, there are different ways how you can respond to other people's pain. One part is apathy. We're like, oh, okay, like, who cares? And then there's sympathy, and then there's empathy, but going a bit further is compassion, right? And compassion is that thing that you imagine being that person's shoes, but you move to action, right? It's not enough to be sympathetic, right? And empathy is good, because you can really feel for that person and want to be there. But having that compassionate mindset of like, no, I have to do something. And it might be, people say posting, but we can do more than that, right? And so I think that people need to, who want to be allies, should say like, hey, okay, what kind of privilege do I have that I can leverage to uplift other Black folks within my company, within my organization, within my community or my network? Because the big thing that we talk about is, access, right? Or even justice, right? Why is it that when Black people are being brutalized, it's like, oh, they deserve it. And it's like, no, they don't. Even if they do, they don't deserve to die the way that they do. So I tell people like, whatever privilege you have, bring this to awareness, like speak about it to your family members, to those who are close to you, start that conversation, and really leverage your privilege to share what is going on, and not just, act like it never happened or just ignore it completely. And so I would say using compassion to drive action to make change, because we need that right now. And so go out and vote, make sure that you're being active and you're being, attentive to what's happening. And I know like a lot of Black people are going through a lot right now. So don't try to like reach out all the time, because it can get a little bit annoying, but do what you can do with what you have, like on your own, educate the people around you. And I think that goes a long way. And yeah, I think it's going to be a constant, journey, but I do feel, as an optimist that we're moving forward, because at least now we can talk about it on a podcast, we can talk about it at work, so I feel like we've made a bit of progress, but there's so much more we have, left to go. And so I do feel like I'm grateful for those who want to help. And it's about time that people really spoke up and really stand for something. It's one thing to be against something, but it's another thing to stand for something. So, ask yourself, what do I stand for? And how am I taking action to show that I stand for those things? And so I hope that people are brave enough to take a stance and fight for racial, justice. That's
so beautiful. I think, especially when we're telling people just be compassionate, I think that's what people need right now. And they need to listen to those voices that really understand what it's like to be in those shoes. And, throughout my career, it's interesting. Diversity is starting to happen. It took forever. But, everything from, gender, identity, things that I never saw in the workplace. I didn't even think so. I think there's a systemic change that needs to happen, and it needs to happen at kind of both ends of the spectrum. Some
Yeah.
people that are set in their ways, they're not going to change. And they were raised in a certain construct and in a certain environment where stuff was tolerated, and they learned the wrong stuff at infancy, right? And there's change agents like you. There's brand transformers that are here right now that are using their voice. They're being people that other people can look at and say, wow, that's a leader. I'm going to follow that leader, right? There's people like myself that I am not white, but I write Caucasian on a exam because Lebanese, Middle Eastern people are put into a certain segment. So I've lived my whole life with a certain level of privilege I didn't even know I had. But then things happened, 9/11, being here as a 9-year-old, coming from the Gulf. I came from Kuwait because of the Gulf War. But people here thought, this guy's coming from Iraq, the country that attacked me, right? So on my first day, people are asking me, do you want to play football? I'm thinking it's soccer. Well, it ended up being American football, and I ended up getting beat up as a 9-year-old on my playground because they wanted to beat up the guy that they thought was the bad guy, right? And but these are 9-year-old kids. They're just talking about what their parents are talking about at home. We don't hate each other when we meet each other. So it's kind of great to see what you're doing. And I think that's feedback people can use, right? It's, listen, be compassionate, empathize where needed, and know when you're called on to step up, or think about what you can do, right? There's programs we can join. There's roles we can open up to diverse hires, right, as managers and as people. And I think it makes for a better leadership team. It makes for a better team environment to have as many different voices and as many different backgrounds. So thanks for touching a little bit on that. I think we can do an entire series of podcasts, and I recommend people follow you and kind of learn from you along that journey, because we are just at the beginning, but it's good that we can talk about it now. I think that's fantastic. So for the next segment, it's kind of a fun thing we do, and we call it IPAs and KPIs. And the reason we call it IPAs and KPIs is IPAs have a great story about, being a beer and not being able to reach India because, back in the colonization days, people from England and India needed their beer. But by the time, the carriage got all the way to India, the beer was rotten, right? So they decided to come up with a new kind of way to brew the beer on the journey and add extra hops. And by the time it got to India, it was good beer, but it was very hoppy and it tasted a little bit different. So they called it India Pale Ale, and that's kind of the story behind it. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool, because to me, I was like, IPAs, it's like some hipster in Capitol Hill. He's got a cool mustache and he loves to drink a bitter beer. So then I kind of looked into it and I was like, wow, there's always a story behind everything, right? And then the KPIs don't need a lot of explanations. I think with every story, we have the opportunity to measure success, measure the success of our careers. So I'm wondering, kind of as I think about you and in your life, in my mind, what IPA would represent you, right? And so we try to kind of name an IPA after one of our guests. So for you, Grace, I'm going to choose the Space Dust IPA because I don't think the sky is the limit for you. I think it's the universe is the limit. And the way you are able to unlock your own potential, but then unlock and help people unlock their potential is why I think you're a brand transformer, and Space Dust IPA is the best to represent you. KPIs, looking at the world through the curious eyes. So I know you don't drink IPAs. I didn't really think this one through.
Yeah.
But I know you're going to have a green tea, which is, you said, something you have every day.
Green tea. I love it.
Awesome. All right, we'll take a sip, and I'll have a Space Dust here. Love it. Nothing like a nice green tea and a beer after a long, hard week, right?
Yeah.
So, Grace, I talked about IPAs being really the story, and then, the KPIs being the metrics. So as you think about your life, your experience, your background, and the plethora of stories that you have, is there a story that stands out to you, and then ways you measured success as that relates to that story? So, for example, maybe a goal that you set and the steps that it took to get there, and how you kind of measured what success looked like to you, or maybe just an anecdote or a story you want to inspire our audience with. Do you have anything top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a bit about the podcast, but you know, it took me a year from when I wanted to do a podcast to when I actually launched because, like I said, I was just like, what am I talking about? Like, who would
Who's gonna
listen?
listen to this?
Like,
Yeah.
it was just a lot of like self doubt. But for me, something that I try to develop is like my mindset, having that growth mindset of like, okay, even though I don't have everything like figured out, like I'm going to start before I'm ready. And so that was the biggest thing where I was like, the first episode launched, I think, in December of last year. And I'm like, I can't let this year end without putting something out there. And it just goes to shows, there's some things that, a lot of people were thinking about, creating, putting out there, but we are the ones limiting ourselves. And I feel like when you're able to position other people like, okay, why am I doing this? Like, who can I help? It's a bit easier to be like, okay, I can't delay anymore because I know there are other people who will benefit from this. And so I remember talking to like my brothers and everyone trying to like, hey, what should I do? And they're like, please just put it already. You've talked about this so much. Like, just put the podcast out. And I'll say something. When I came to Seattle, I'd never visited. I didn't even know what Seattle was in a sense. So when I moved out for the apprenticeship program, my biggest thing was building community, right? I'm just like, okay, who are other Black women in the community like me, or other people of color in the community like me? And for the first year, I really invested in community, not just mine, but helping build others, like either that's, Black Girls Code or Future for Us, based in Seattle. And I was just like, yeah, like, how can I really help other people who are already doing the work, and just show up for them? And so when I launched the podcast, I was really blown away by the support because I'm like, oh wow, like all this time that I've invested in other people, obviously not knowing that I would need that support later. It was just great to see my community showing up for me, and so if I had to kind of give like my blueprint for success, it's first of all having that growth mindset to be like, hey, like I don't have to have everything perfectly or all put together to create or to share with others what I'm learning. And second of all, like build your community. And if you're not able to, engage with community, like help other people, show up for other people. And I think when you need it, they'll be there for you. One of my guests on one of the episodes said, build your network before you need it, build your community before you need it. And I think that that's something that is relatable to anyone in regards of your industry, in regards of your, role. I think that in this day and age, we've all seen how important relationship is, despite, if it's family, friends, coworkers, we all long to be like together with people. It's so hard to be separated. And so we can see the value that relationship and people have during this time. So I tell people like, hey, believe in yourself, have a growth mindset, and invest in building communities.
That is so cool. Yeah, I think you're a mentor at Year Up and then Husky Nation as well. Is that another group that you're in?
Yeah, and the University.
I was trying to keep track of your groups, but then I didn't have enough room on my screen. So there's so many ways. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's I know a little bit what that career feels like at Microsoft, and I know a little bit of how busy you can be, but then also to be able to leverage your free time, whatever you have, to then mentor. That's why you're such an inspiration to me, is I think that you're just scratching that potential. You're just unlocking your own potential. And then with the growth mindset, you realize it's never going to end. We're not professional baseball players, with a 10-year shelf life, right? I think in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and with the way healthcare is going and how long we're going to be able to live, is if you have a growth mindset, man, I'm excited to see what I'm doing at 65, 70,
Yeah.
Maybe I'll finally become an artist and move to Spain. Who knows, right? But I think that's part of the reason, I wanted to speak with you. And then one last thing that I love to do is trying to get people to, succinctly wrap everything, their mission in life, the way that they see their outlook for things into a hashtag. And I know that's hard to do, but if you were going to say, this is Grace MacJones, this is what I'm about, or this is what I want to leave you with, or this is how I want to empower you, and you want it to be a hashtag that really is associated with you, can you think of something that would kind of resonate, that encapsulates all that is Grace?
Ooh, that's kind of hard.
I know. I love putting people on the spot on this
I
one.
know. I would definitely say the future is bright. I think that a lot of people right now are hopeless. And without hope, there is no future, right? Because we hope for tomorrow, we hope for something better. And not to take away from all the pain and trauma people are experiencing right now, but knowing that you can feel that pain and still be hopeful, knowing that you can go through that job loss and still be hopeful. And so that's kind of the outlook I have on life, not because, and this is not positive talks, this, I think there's a term for toxic positivity. And I'm like, that's not it. There are things that are bad and we call it out. But a framework for me, my mentality is like, hey, like things will get better. This is not the time to say, oh, how worse, can it get? It's, I think, a time to say, will things get better, and I hope it does get better. So it's all about, your mindset and your framework. And so I would just say there's hope for the future.
I love it. I started off saying that you're one of the brightest minds in the way that you light up a room and having the brightest smile as well in technology. And then you end it with the future is bright. So I think your positive outlook is something that's contagious. It's inspiring. It's empowering. It's such a privilege to know you and for you to be with us today. I think I want to thank you on behalf of everyone listening and everyone at Enviho and the Brand Transformers. Thank you so much, Grace. I think we talked a little bit about your podcast. So where can people follow you? And I think you're probably across all mediums, but where's the best place they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with someone who is as hopeful for the future and loves to highlight other voices. So I'm excited to be here. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Grace MacJones, or even on Twitter. I've been active on there more recently at Grace MacJones, but always happy to connect with people and to, share the podcast with people. And Tech Unlocked, you can listen on Apple, Google, anywhere like you listen to your audio podcast. And we're also on YouTube. So Tech Unlocked.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. We'll be following your journey and we appreciate the conversation, and you have a great day. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
The Brand Transformers podcast is brought to you by Enviho, where brand science meets creative vision. Every brand has a story. We're here to help you tell it.